Today we're going to do a deep dive of SHINee albums and pick the best album and best EP, but not for music, for visual concept and design and everything that makes an album outside of the music. One thing to note though is that I won't be able to really go through every single release they've had, so I wanted to pick just a few things to take out, so that would be OSTs. I'm also excluding their Japanese releases, so to make it more fun for myself, I figured it'd be nice to have almost like an awards ceremony for these albums. But yeah, this is just how I have fun in my room, alone, unemployed behavior. So let's start with the first EP, Replay. First category is photography. Right off the bat, they're using a neutral background because they want to highlight the members and the colors of their clothing. I don't think they're trying to be too experimental with the photography. Posing them differently from one another, I think, does a good job of highlighting the differences between the members and starting the branding of each member's image. Moving on to these spreads, I very much prefer sets over just regular backdrop or neutral backdrop. It just gives the models more to interact with. You can also see the idols in a more natural environment, which makes them feel a little bit more approachable, I think, and relatable. I kind of wish that in the direction of the photography, the members were allowed to just be a little bit more relaxed and maybe interact with the set around them a little bit more, like kind of what Key is doing here with the camera. I think that's good in terms of interacting with the set. But then when you look at their group picture, I feel like more could have been done with this. Maybe you could have had two members looking seriously into the lens, but the other two members are looking at each other or interacting somehow. So the scoring of the photography, I think I would give it a 4.5. Moving on to fashion and styling. When it comes to the members' haircuts, I honestly don't mind them for what the time period was. I actually really like how a lot of these haircuts have blunt edges. It makes the haircut look a little bit edgier than just a classic like boyish haircut. But I really like that they're going with a monochromatic look for each of the members. I think they stand out from each other really well, and they're not trying to be, I think, too gimmicky with it, because even though you can see them in these monochromatic outfits, I think they break that a little bit by showing you a different style of fashion that's a little bit more streetwear, which I think all show a more relaxed vibe than necessarily what we're seeing here, which is a little bit more dressed up. I'm not a huge fan of the fashion here for this spread. They don't have a lot of personality. They just look like what you would see on a mannequin at like a random like basics store. Overall, I would give the fashion and styling here a 5. And I think what brings it up from 4.5 to 5 for me is actually Key's outfit, which I think is the most interesting or experimental compared to the other ones. He has these poofy pants on and there's like this gradient going on with his outfit. It gives it an interesting look. Now moving on to typography, I actually really like SHINee's first logo. I like that they added those extending lines from the N and the E. I think that it breaks up the negative space really well on the album. And if you can see here, they're playing already with the logo and using it as an element, because we see here the SHINee logo on the back, and the line of the E is creating a divider between the member names and the rest of the information on the back here. It also connects to this illustration shape, which makes the graphic elements on the album feel more connected and well thought out. I like how under some of these pictures, you're still seeing all of the members' names. It's just that the member you're on, their name is being highlighted. So I think that's a nice detail. So for now, typography gets a 5.5 for me. Okay, this is something that is obviously not clear in the scan images because it requires the album to be moving with the light to see. I really like that there's debossing on the album. It creates texture, it creates a dynamic element to the album, and it's iridescent in this example, which is so SHINee. As I'm seeing here, it's a very classic like square album. For the CD itself, I like that the shapes are printed on the CD as well as the logo. Packaging gets a 5 for me. It does what it needs to do. Now for the last assessment category, we have concept and tone. I think they're trying to debut these members as a serious but playful boy band that can look very cleaned up, but they're also showing you that they have this more edgy side through the streetwear outfits that we're seeing. Even though they try to show some more organic feelings in this kind of set, the overall tone I think is still very dramatic because you have very much dramatic lighting and you're trying to show each member in that way. So I think concept and tone also gets a 5 for me here because it does what it needs to do is very straightforward and it highlights the members well, but it doesn't really stand out in a lot of other areas for me. Now for the fun part, bias per album. The members are presented equally and no one really jumps out immediately for me, but if I picked up the album and I saw this picture, I think I would have probably been in love because he gives off such a dreamy slash broody look. I think I would definitely gravitate the most towards Junghyun in this album. On the front cover, I like already that we're getting more dynamic poses. Knowing that SHINee has this branding image of them being very shiny and like reflecting light back onto the fans or stuff like that. I like that that's being shown in the photography and the fashion. You can see that they're playing with light. We have a very dramatic light because look at the shadows of these portraits. I mean, they look snatched. Photography for this album gets a 5 for me. The posing has improved, the modeling has improved. They're experimenting with different types of light instead of just using one dramatic light. The lighting for the close-ups, I think, really highlights the members' faces very well and shows off their good looks. Now for the fashion and styling. Seeing a lot of jacket emphasis in this one. We see Junghyun in this very metallic gold jacket, and then we have Taemin wearing this jacket that looks like it's structured but still very like flowy and organic. So I think that's a cool element, and it still has like metallic sleeves to carry out this like metallic concept that they have going on, or at least having some element that is shimmery or reflective of light in their clothing. And we do have some bold choices being made, I think, with how bright Minho's coat is as well as Key's neon jacket. With all of that being considered though, I think that the fashion is underwhelming for me. I would give fashion and styling a 4.5. I think it does an okay job of dressing up the members, but it's not very memorable. I honestly feel a bit underwhelmed by the typography. Yes, they're using the logo from the first EP, which I really liked, and they still are using kind of the lines from the logo to break up the elements that you're seeing on the back cover. But it is unfortunate that all of these interesting like typographical decisions are being done on the back of the album. I'm actually going to give the typography category 3.5. That's how underwhelmed I am by the SHINee World typesetting. Since it's the same type of packaging as the EP that we just looked at, it'll get the same score. The overall concept, although it has a very playful introduction with the cover being this picture of them jumping, it's very serious when you open the pages. It is a little bit underwhelming for me conceptually. For the fun part, bias per album. For me in this one, it's Onyu. He just looks so good. So I know that there's a version B of this album, and when I was starting this video, I was trying to think like, if there are multiple versions of an album, would they impact the original score of version A or whatever? But I don't think it's feasible actually to look at every single version of an album, especially where some albums might have like 5 different versions. So I don't think I'm gonna let it affect the original scores, but I think it'd be fun to still look at and make a few comments about. I'm already impressed by the typography. It's so fun and it's so playful. It makes it stand out a lot more than the version A album. I'm seeing what the concept is for the clothing, I would say, like the fashion, and even how it blends into that design of the album. This is very clearly like British boy band inspired. I'm seeing that the posing is also improving significantly. We don't have all the members doing the same thing. Like in this one, they just have their own thing going on, and I think it makes the picture a lot more interesting. It makes me want to look at it longer. These pictures where we're seeing them like sit in a natural environment, you can tell from the way they're posed that it feels more of like a documentary style picture. Like they just finished practicing and someone is like, all right, we're gonna snap a photo of you. I like that they included that because it adds that playful and organic element that I think is missing from version A. And then for these member close-ups, I'm a huge fan of them. They're playing with light and it's actually showing a much more intimate view of the members. It kind of makes it feel like I can form a memory of this image and it would be more sentimental because it looks like what we see memories represented as like a little bit blurry, a little bit affected by light. And I think this spread shows the most dynamic and visually interesting photo. I mean, just the composition of the picture with the stairs. Overall, I think I like this version of the album a lot more because I think it accomplishes the concept for version A and just like refines it a lot more. We have Amigo, which is the album repackage, and it seems just from the cover that they're using images from the photo shoot of the version B album. I like that we're seeing different sets and backgrounds here, and it seems like all of the rest of the spreads are done in black and white. It's nice when black and white photography is well thought out, so it's trying to highlight maybe an expression or a certain feeling through the light and the contrast that comes with black and white photography. Oh my god, I didn't notice the motorcycle had the SHINee type on it. I need that. This is growing on me more and more. It does feel like black and white photography is being used for a reason, and that's to highlight these very almost like silent film era type of poses, just like being very expressive with their faces, and that way you only focus on the member and their expression. When simple is done tastefully, it can be really memorable. So for me, I would give photography here a 7.5. In terms of fashion and styling, because this is reminiscent of a different style, I kind of have to look at it from the lens of, is the fashion showcasing that style well? Is it reinventing the style? In this case, I think it represents that era really well, but I don't think it reinvents it necessarily or adds something super interesting. So with that being said, I would say fashion and styling gets a 6 from me. I notice obviously that there are different colors for the type. We have MI being highlighted in black, and at first I was like, oh, maybe this is just like fun aesthetic contrast that they're trying to add. Then I read the Korean version that is so perfectly placed within the G, so that already gets like a lot of points for me. I can read a little bit to tell that this is in 3 syllables basically. Amigo. Are they creating that distinction of the syllables with the word amigo? And they're doing that with color, and I think that's so smart. I just like seeing how the 2 languages are being handled here with English and Korean. So for the typography, it might seem simple, but very, very tastefully done. So that for me gets an 8.5. So it looks like we're looking at a similar case. Packaging is going to be the same, 5. It's just very straightforward. Now for the concept and tone. For a repackage, I think it does a very successful job of still relating to the previous releases, but because it is a more safe concept to go with, it's more of like a nod to something, and it's done very tastefully, but it's also not something that's super unique. I probably would give it a 6. So my bias for this album is gonna have to be Key, and I think it's because his posing is just so striking in this album. It is a different day, but I am wearing the same outfit for continuity. Now we're gonna dig into the Romeo EP, which I'm really excited about because this is when I think SHINee started experimenting more with fashion, different styles. Right now, the outfits and the poses of the members just have a lot more visual interest in terms of the photography. In this one, we're seeing so much negative space on the album, and that creates like a really nice composition that draws your eyes to the title itself here, as well as the members themselves. So they both attract your eye to the album without visually competing, and I think that's really nice. The photography and the fashion are very closely intertwined here. They're working hand in hand. And right now, the main visual focus of these pictures, yes, it is the members, but it's also how they're interacting with the accessories that they have on. We talked about group images. We talked about how nice it is to see organic dynamics emerge out of these photo shoots or images. I have not seen the members look this relaxed compared to the other albums. This also could be because they've been together now for some time, and their dynamics in relationship to the band and each other have probably organically developed as well. And you can really see that in these images. It looks very candid and like they're just standing there, interacting with each other and having fun, and the photographer is just taking a bunch of pictures. I think it's great now that we're also getting one-on-one member interactions, or at least starting to divide up the group and showcasing those different unique dynamics that we have between the group members. And then we have this picture which makes me laugh because I think they're recreating this one moment they had in 2008. I'll pull up the clip of it. This is such a visually interesting image for me because it plays on perspective and they're lined up in a way that's just so visually satisfying. The angle of the image is also interesting, so compositionally this is an amazing image. There are other pictures that showcase this play on perspective. Now for these images, which I'm a huge fan of, they're being blended with the other elements and assessment categories that we have, which is the illustration and graphic elements as well as the type. It's also done in a way that doesn't affect the integrity of the photos. I'm a huge fan of the photography. It's fun, there's a lot of movement. It utilizes the members' organic dynamic very, very well. It also gives each member enough to work with so they can showcase their individual charms. Photography gets an 8.5 for me. Fashion and styling. We have so much more accessories. We have so many outfit changes for the members, as well as dressing them in a way that makes it feel like these are their own clothes. The fashion is creating a visual story. I can tell from the outfits that are chosen from them and the accessories. And we're seeing the reference to something like Peter Pan, but also could be like classic books, something like Lord of the Flies. It's that feeling of like these kids that get lost or they run away from home, and all they have is each other, their friendship, and the fun that they can create amongst each other. And the biggest indicator of that is the masks that they have on. You can even imagine or create the scenario of these lost kids or youths collecting scrap material and putting these together. Then we have something very experimental, which is wearing hair. In this example though, it looks kind of fake, like it looks like it could be wigs.
Do you wear wigs?
Where we're seeing them in more of casual basics like tank tops or t-shirts, we're seeing like bugs on them. The visual story and concept of them being these kids that are maybe like lost in the forest, or they've basically emancipated themselves from any type of adult supervision. I think having the insect on the clothes just plays into that even more. I think this one gets a 9 for me. I'm gonna talk about the typography and the illustrative elements at the same time. They're so intertwined in this album that it'll be hard, I think, to talk about them separately. First of all, the title of the EP, Romeo. I can almost see this lettering being done on a school desk with a pencil, where you're bored and you're just doodling, but you're also exploring different styles. Maybe you grab a pen and you just start scribbling on top of all of it. This looks like the canvas of a younger person who gets to do whatever they want with this blank space that they have. And I think that's done so well. I mean, look at even some of these doodles. We have like a tire with a rope going through it, which you could even imagine like some of these kids might create a makeshift like swing and use it to jump into the water. We've seen these images before in movies and other media where we associate this feeling of youthfulness and not abiding by adults' laws and rules. And here we get even more hand-drawn type, and the illustrations and doodles have so much texture to them. For me, both the typography and illustration and graphic elements get the same score because they're so intertwined, and it is a high score for me. For packaging, I already like that we're moving away from just the square album that we were seeing before, which creates a lot more space to showcase photographs really well and add more into the booklet. This flap is also really nice, where you can see almost this like hidden image of the members. Whoa! Okay, so this is my first time seeing this, where now we have SHINee scribbled in that way. It looks so cool, guys. I love the credits page and this back. I need this EP. I will say I'm not a huge fan of this packaging when it comes to like holding the CD. I know this is done so often. It's still done to this day. And the reason I don't like this is because my assumption, these flaps are gonna get weathered over time. If you keep taking out the CD and putting it back in, they might like break over time, and then you don't have a place to hold your CD. I'm gonna go back and adjust the score for typography and illustration, and we're gonna give both a 9. Packaging gets a 6.5. We already talked about the concept and tone so much, I think, while explaining the other assessment categories, so I'm just gonna jump straight into it. This gets a 9 for me. It's really hard to pick a bias for this one, but it's gonna have to be Key for me. And this is because consistently so far, Key has done such a good job of understanding the set and the concept and how to deliver. Next up we have 2009, A Year of Us, which also came out in 2009. Just like the title says. So in terms of photography, and it seems like a lot of other elements, we're back to more of a serious vibe. So we went from like a more youthful and playful style that we had in Romeo into something a little bit edgier. And so the photography feels very reflective of that. I could almost imagine the story being told of like these 5 artists that are in a band, and this is just moments before they go on stage, and it's like photographed in that way. We also have a lot of black and white photography here, which feels very different from the Amigo pictures that we were looking at. Here we're getting a lot more of the documentary style photographs in black and white. We're also seeing a lot of texture in the background, and I think the style of photography fits within that concept that we're talking about of the alternative boy band image. And I also like that in the color photography here, there's still very much a stylistic choice being made, and it still feels cohesive with the black and white images, where a lot of what we're seeing is still black, but then we're using the red and and all of the clothing to really stand out from the background. So considering this shift in image, I think photography does a good job of transitioning them into this more like rebellious and alternative image. We also had more posed pictures as well as organic pictures. It definitely does not get as creative as Romeo, I think, in terms of like angles, composition, playfulness, all of those elements that you can add into photography. So I think I would give this one a 7. I think the fashion also knows here how to fit into the concept of the album that's emerging for me. We have the leather jacket, graphic tees, we have the bandanas, very much within that style. And then we have the visual cohesion of them being like kind of like a unified band because they're all wearing black and red. I also like the variety in jackets that we're seeing here. Even though the color palette feels limited and uniform, at least there's still choices being made into the garments of clothing to give the fashion a little bit of texture. What we haven't talked about yet and we haven't seen in previous albums is visible makeup. At least I'm seeing this with Key here. And I think makeup, for the most part, really accentuates people's features, but it can also create a different image and vibe for them. So I like that we're seeing that introduced here. But I would say Key is the only one that I see that in this album. I want to start with Minho's hair because I love this hairstyle on him. It also looks like a little shag or mullet haircut. I know that not a lot of people are a fan of Key's haircut at the time because it's asymmetrical, but he also has a haircut that can be seen as high fashion in a way. And that's really evident in this spread right here. Even the addition of silk, of red silk here, really drives that point home that this is a glam punk kind of look. For the most interesting hair I'm seeing in this one is Jonghyun. They're playing with a dual tone hair color and I think it just makes him look so unique, especially knowing that he was kind of the center of the group. So I think it just makes him stand out from the rest of the members in a nice way. Fashion and styling gets a 7.5 because I think the experimentation with the hairstyles is really what makes the styling and fashion feel like it's actually committing to the concept. From what I can see for the title of the album, I actually like that they're using more of like a decorative font, but most of all I really like how they have it stacked. So there's the 2009 year of Us. It really makes you slow down and read it in that way, which I think fits the title. I also like now that we're blending photography with lyric booklets. The CD seems to be also housed in paper with this one. The typography for me has some of its charms, but doesn't really stand out that much, especially when you compare it to what we're seeing with Romeo. So for me, that gets a 6. Packaging, I guess, does what it needs to do. I'm not a huge fan of the dimensions of the booklet, so I'm gonna give it a 5. Overall, I think this album does a good job of being cohesive with the concept and tone, because obviously looking through this, it is almost like a preview to the Lucifer era and a visual sampler of what we're gonna see with SHINee moving forward. So for concept and tone, I'm giving this one a 7. For bias per album, this time it's gonna be Minho. The hair, the styling, Minho. Let's talk about photography. So before in the older albums, we have very like classic studio lighting that highlights the members' features really well. It works fine, it works great. It's very like magazine style shooting. Then we moved on from that a little bit in the EP that we just looked at. In this one, I think that's done even more because when you look at the front cover, some of the members' faces are covered with the type and they're a little bit blurry, and the picture itself is printed in a way that it's supposed to look a little bit grainy, a little bit distressed. And this is where I like that we're moving more towards concept-driven visuals versus just having to highlight the members. Now, possibly one of my favorite things, there are so many spreads and pages that I can't tell where the photography begins and the graphic or art elements end. But you see those textures and colors blending in perfectly with the photography. So before with Romeo, where we had doodles and scribbles, it showed off a younger image. And here, because a lot of this artwork looks like graffiti, and because of the clothing and everything just showing more of a street and alternative aesthetic, it's such a nice graduation, I think, and movement from the Romeo EP to this. I don't think I've seen in the other albums any type of dynamic posing like this. So I think compositionally, doing something different with the posing, I'm just loving in this album. Photography gets an 8.5 here. I am a huge fan of the haircuts in this era. I love Taemin's Lucifer hair. It's longer, it has like a very beautiful brown color, and it presents the image of him in a much different way than what we've been used to, I think, looking at the earlier albums. I'm so happy that we're seeing something different from Onyu. I don't think that we've ever seen his forehead so far in these albums. And I know I picked Minho earlier for his long hair, but even with this shorter hair, I love the micro bangs that they gave him him. Now for my favorite Jonghyun hair, I think, ever. It has texture, it's frizzy, it goes up, like it stands up. And just the way that he looks, his aesthetics, the makeup, the hair, the clothing, he just looks so badass. Like, I don't know how else to say it. I think the set and the concept was thought out in the makeup, and I like seeing that. I also like that now we're seeing makeup on more than one member. It all plays together and just creates a very visually interesting and striking look for them. The clothing in this one gets so many points for me. It's actually kind of insane how I hadn't noticed until now all the choices that were made with the outfits, because I think it's easy to write off outfits from that era as just like, oh, that was just the 2010s, like we were dressing crazy back then. But taking the time to actually look at the outfits and the choices being made, it's actually so cool and feels very like futuristic in a cyberpunk kind of way. I'm getting a lot from these details on the members' legs, like what looks like it could be a knee protector extended all the way down. It gives it this very like cyborg feeling. I am a huge fan of this outfit because it picks a very interesting place of the body to kind of showcase or expose. This top might be one of my favorites because it drives that like cyborg feeling even more forward, where like the jacket itself kind of looks like it could be the body of a robot. And the contrast of something so heavy like this jacket being on top of his chest without any shirt, I think creates like a very strong contrast and sells the point even more, like that we're mixing human elements with more cyberpunk elements. I would give the fashion and styling a 9. I think it's done so well, it's so creative, it's edgy. It also does an amazing job of helping SHINee transition out of this kind of like good boy band image, and it sends a very clear message that they cannot and should not be defined by the previous styling decisions that were made for them, and that they can fit different aesthetics. The typography here knows how to take a step back when it needs to, because there's already so much going on in the album. We have bold styling choices being made, the angles of the pictures are different, there's already texture in the images. There are subtle decisions being made that I think know how to play into the concept without being overpowering. Look at this lyric page here, where we get this paint splatter and it's even covering some of the typography, but it doesn't matter because it's part of the aesthetic. And we're also using different colors, even though they could have easily been like, okay, all of these pictures are dark, we're just gonna use a white font like we did on the front cover. No, they're playing around, they're using colors that are available in the textures and the paint splatters that we're seeing everywhere else. It feels like it's not separated from the rest of the album. It's still very visually interesting to look at, very fun to look at, and I think that distinguishes itself really well from all of the previous ones that we looked at. Typography here also gets a 9. I already talked about illustration and graphic elements so much so far. I'm actually gonna give it a 10 here. If you remove the illustration and graphic elements from the album, you like lose half of the concept. That's how important they are to the album in my opinion, and I feel like that to me gets a perfect score. Now for the unboxing, I guess what's interesting here is that when you remove the CD, you can kind of see an image of the band, so it does feel like a little bit of a hidden image, so that's cool. The CD print itself I think is super cool. I found that the packaging was still very straightforward. It's just a booklet like the one before, so I'm just gonna give it a 5. Where before we had concepts that were very like reminiscent of something else, in this one, because of the mixture of art and fashion and everything else that we're seeing, it creates a very unique concept and tone, so it also gets a 9 for me. For the bias per album, it's 100% Jonghyun. So after Lucifer, SHINee released Hello, the repackaged album of Lucifer. I do like that we're getting something interesting with the composition of these images, just the way that the members are standing here. But then when it comes to the photos on the inside, this is really what the photography style is. I will say, like, I'm a bit disappointed. The style is so simple and doesn't really offer something that stands out that much for me. It was understandable when we saw the style of photography in the first EP, where we just have the members, a white backdrop, but I think after seeing really cool concepts like Romeo and then Lucifer, this feels like taking a step back from something really cool and conceptual into something too stripped down, because you can do a very simple and dramatic look while still being somewhat creative in ways, and I'm not really seeing that here. I think that visually, photography misses the mark for me, so I'm giving it a 4. The most interesting decisions happening to me in terms of fashion are Minho and Key's outfits, because they're the most visually striking, I think, out of all the members. With Minho's outfit, it's because of the shoulder pads. They create such a nice frame and silhouette for him that looks a little bit more interesting than just a regular suit. And I do like that they're pairing his very like sharp and cleaned up suit with some combat boots. And then Key, obviously, because he's wearing full red and it's very like visually striking and monochromatic. And there is like some type of visual cohesion being done with the outfits. Even though Minho is wearing like full black, he has this leopard print tie which matches Jonghyun's shirt and pants as well as Taemin's pants. I don't know, I feel like the clothing doesn't really have anything striking in it, and because I'm having a hard time understanding the concept of this album, everything I'm seeing so far in terms of visuals just feels very, very underwhelming. So I actually give the fashion and styling 3 here. What I really like about the typography here is that it's giving a nod to the actual song where SHINee says hello twice, like hello, hello. So it's like a call and response type thing, and they're adding it into the type. But I think that's actually the most interesting part of the album I'm seeing so far. And because typography does what it needs to do, but it also adds more of an interesting element to the album, I will give it a 6. So what's interesting here is that even though the packaging looks very similar to the Romeo packaging that we saw, because it looks to be the same size, the difference is that with the Romeo packaging, it felt like every part of the packaging was utilized well, that I really didn't mind that it was just like a standard photo book, because it felt like, yes, you need the real estate to add a bunch of photography and make everything look really cool and have like loud textures and images. But in here, because of how simplistic the photos are and how big they're printed on the packaging, like I would almost rather see the size of the packaging we did with 2009 A Year of Us. So here packaging just gets a 5. It does what it needs to do, but because all of the other things are also limiting it, so there's not a lot going on, I would give it a 5. For the concept and tone, because we have a more of a serious tone, but there's not really much else going on. There's not a lot of storytelling. Visually, there's not a lot of interest. So for me, it doesn't even meet the like 5 rating where it does what it needs to do. It feels like it was just a photo shoot that had very mediocre styling. Nothing is memorable to me about this other than the type moment that we saw with the 2 hellos. So for the concept and tone, for me, this gets a 3. For buys per album, even though I'm really underwhelmed by these pictures, I really do appreciate here that Taemin is posing differently, and I'm seeing this look that I love in him in future years emerging with these pictures where he's like very intensely looking at the camera. I just feel like it's nice to see him grow into the artist that he's become today, and seeing like really small moments in where he started switching from like the maknae of the group into more of his own individual identity. Now let's move on to the Sherlock EP, and honestly, I'm happy to see this much color and a very clear and loud concept, even just looking at everything from far away. In the Lucifer album, we talked about how we were seeing more skin from the members, and I think it's because they were trying to move in a more mature direction. They want to show a more artistic image of themselves as artists who are growing and as adults who are growing in the K-pop industry. So I think this is what they're trying to do here as well with the photography. The only thing I would say is that there are some members where it does feel like a little bit voyeuristic, and I think that's because the camera angle is much higher than where they're sitting, whereas Key and Jonghyun, the camera is a little bit closer to their eye line. Another thing that stands out with a lot of these images is that even though the members are shirtless, which often when you see boy bands that are shirtless, there's this kind of like hyper masculinity being presented, but with SHINee here, what I really like is that we're seeing more of a androgynous slash kind of like feminine take, even with Minho, who presents kind of like the most masculine image in the band in terms of it being kind of like a stereotypical masculinity with him doing a lot of sports. I still think the photography is highlighting those softer sides of him while still maintaining his kind of like charm that comes naturally through him. It's very clear that again we're marrying both the photography and the illustration very well together, and I like that we're getting 2 types of illustrations here to match the photos. Some of them are very loud and scribbly and colorful, but then we see some of these very muted and light thin line illustrations, and these are matched with the photography of the members that's very delicate and quaint in a way. What I like about this image a lot and this one below it right here of Jonghyun, is that we're playing with the softness concept that I talked about earlier. And a great way of doing that is to use light to kind of accomplish that intimate feeling that still has a little bit of elusiveness to it. I could already start creating a visual story. There's a group of 5 members and they're getting together as friends. They're hanging out in the backyard, so they put up a tent and they put up fairy lights and they start playing around with paint. They're relaxing, they're drinking. It's very casual, but also very soft. This kind of visual storytelling, I think, is so powerful because once you associate this kind of imagery or feeling, for a lot of people, these senses can be evoked just through visuals. Photography is going to be a 9.5 for this one. But now let's move on to fashion and styling. For the fashion, it's very clear that we're seeing a more kind of flowy, casual, and globally inspired outfits. We see a lot of texture, different fabrics, patterns, and those busy patterns sometimes complement or contrast the set itself. And we see that in this picture, for example, where we're seeing a patterned shirt and it's added on top of this rug that is patterned. And we see the contrast where Minho isn't wearing a shirt. So that contrasted by the couch and the pattern that he's sitting on creates a lot of visual interest to me and dimension. So I like that they thought about the photography, fashion, and the set as elements that can play into each other instead of them being a coincidence or something that's thought about separately. And now we're moving into the territory of brightly colored hair. And there was a certain point in time where it wasn't as normalized as now. So doing something like that to your hair was seen as very drastic. I think it looks amazing on him. It also looks like it was sprayed on his hair, which fits the story as well, like of friends playing around. And for the rest of the members, I'm noticing none of them really have super dark hair in this concept. We're seeing a lot of highlights and light browns in their hair, which I think ends up photographing really well with light because it adds to that kind of softer look. And I think that Taemin's haircut succeeds in terms of presenting this kind of androgynous look. I also love the range of accessories and props that we're seeing here. We're seeing a lot of these stacked bracelets on top of each other. They look like friendship bracelets like you could have made yourself. Fashion and styling gets an 8.5 here. The fashion really fits the concept. It helps tell the visual story that we're talking about. And I think it creates a really nice atmosphere that blends well with the rest of the set. I actually love the typography in this one because it's thicker, but it still has these little details that makes it look unique. And especially when I look at some of these pictures where the type is actually interacting with the imagery and the illustrations in such a well done way, they're doing something artistic with the way they're stacking Sherlock and the members' names. It creates something different with the type. Now the letters themselves can feel like part of the artwork. They're also adding a lot of content that's handwritten. I think it just adds more texture to the album in terms of typography. So for typography, I'm giving it a 9.5. Holding my excitement for the illustration and the graphic elements that we're seeing in this album. We talked earlier about how the illustration knows when to be busy and when to be more delicate to match the feeling and atmosphere that's being created with the photography. The name of the album is Sherlock, which you're going to associate naturally with kind of searching for something, trying to figure out a riddle. And we're seeing certain illustrations that signify this idea of curiosity and exploring something or finding something. We see the pointed hands illustrated a lot. We also see a map, which is very directly okay, we're trying to find something. Even seeing staircases implies that you're trying to reach something. There's the eye, there's the yarn being untangled. We're also seeing a maze here in a way, but it's scribbled on top of. Even this illustration here of 4 faces converging together, their brains are almost mixing to come up with this conclusion. And this is one of my favorite spreads that shows a little bit of everything. We have the scribbled type and it's fitting perfectly with the doodles, right? When you see this here and how it curves around the staircase. So certain elements of the spread complement each other in that way. But then you have pictures that are cut out of Key here and they're pasted on top of everything else. It feels almost like collaged together and then doodled on top of. And that by itself just creates so much texture, so much visual interest. I could spend an entire day looking at these illustrations in detail. And I think that's what tells me that this gets a perfect score for me. And then to make things even better, they are using this kind of plastic sleeve for the packaging packaging, and the fact that they're thinking about how the picture, the cover, and the sleeve and the illustrations fit together. I think that kind of detailing and thoughtfulness when it comes to the packaging and the illustration is amazing, and it's another indicator that they are thinking about all of these elements together. See, this is where I don't mind that they have this paper flap, which I wasn't a huge fan of in previous albums because it wears down fast over time. But at least they don't have two of those. They have a gap here that allows you to be able to grab the CD from that side. So I think that's actually a decent solution for this kind of packaging. So far, packaging has been getting not that much of a high score in the previous albums, but I think this is the first packaging where they're trying to do something a little bit more creative. So packaging for me here is an 8.5. So we've been talking about the concept and tone indirectly for a while now, and I like that they're moving in a more mature direction through this less aggressive, like masculine feeling and more of this kind of delicate and comfortable feeling. The one part of it that doesn't fit quite that much is it feels like they're trying to add a sensual layer on top of the concept. It just doesn't work for me, I feel like, as well. On top of the voyeuristic feeling that I talked about earlier with the camera angle, it just takes a little bit away from me from the concept. My bias for this album is Minho. I just can't get over this haircut. Now we're moving on to the Misconception series. There was the Misconception of You, then there's the Misconception of Me, and then they repackaged both of these albums into the Misconception of Us. And even though I'm gonna kind of look at them closely, I'm still considering them as part of like the same entity in a way. This has to be one of my favorite album covers I've ever seen, period, not just in K-pop. I think it's a very smart way to still show the members, but showcase the art style up front. And we're still including some of the scribble elements and the doodle style that we saw in previous albums that they've done. The fact that they keep reinventing this style that they've been utilizing, which has a lot of the sketch art, it feels clear that there's an appreciation for fine art and how to perfectly blend that with other forms of art like photography and collage. We're seeing Onyu on the cover. I love that they're taking out a part of his face here so you can see more of the background that's creating texture with the scribbles. And then you have other elements like horses and birds, rabbits, organic elements that are being overlaid on top of them. This is a very well thought out collage. And so even though it looks busy and fun and chaotic, it's very methodical, and I think that makes me appreciate it even more. And then when I look at the patterns that we're seeing on set, as well as other elements like the horses, the cotton playing the part of clouds, even Onyu's mixing of patterns, it creates a very whimsical feeling. And looking more at these pictures, it feels like maybe there's a story being told of like the power of playing pretend or having a very wild imagination that allows you to kind of look beyond what's just in front of you. I found it interesting as well that we have this kind of toy wooden horse that we're seeing here, but then we see this image of Jonghyun with what looks like a more realistic horse, and he's also on a desk sitting on top of clouds. It's kind of that feeling I used to get when I would sit in a classroom when I was younger and all I had was the desk in front of me, but when I let my imagination run wild, there was a whole world that I was dreaming of to keep myself entertained. And if that's the kind of story that's being told here, I think that's very smart and creative. For photography angles and composition of pictures, there's so much variety here. We're getting member photos, close-ups of them, but still the camera angle is interesting. We're also playing with space. And a lot of the other pictures, it feels like you could extend out the set a lot bigger than what it actually is. But then when I look at this picture of Taemin standing between two walls that are very narrow, I think it creates a really nice contrast between this like feeling of being stuck in a corner and then the other one being like breaking out of it through imagination and whimsy. So when I look at the spacesuit that the members are interacting with, I think it plays into that concept that I've been talking about as well, of like the wild imagination reaching to the sky, almost into space. I also like that they're playing with light as well here. Like for example, this image that looks overexposed, and it creates a more dramatic look for Key, but it still has a softness to it because of the light. I just really like seeing this kind of variety of photography that still feels cohesive within the visual theme. It's trying something new and showcasing the members in different settings, lightings, and styles of photography. This style of black and white photography is incredible. I love how soft the edges of Key and the background that he's in. It creates this very kind of like memory-like feeling that I've mentioned in so many of the other albums, and it's done perfectly here. This kind of cutting off the face at the edge, as well as creating this texture that kind of looks like the image was not printed fully. Maybe it got some water damage. I think all of this adds to the artistic expression of the photography and plays well into the theme. Photography gets a perfect score for me here. It showcases the members very well and shows them in a lot of different and interesting angles. There's more creativity and artistic expression being done through the photography. There are some black and white images that look just incredibly done. There are interesting poses happening. We have experimental stuff happening. Even group pictures, I love that they're not being centered in the frame all the time. We're getting interesting crops on these pictures while still providing us some of these classic images of all of the members sitting next to each other. I think it's just perfectly done. I love the fashion and styling. In my opinion, it does a good job when it does explore something new and something that plays into the visual story of the album. And I think the fashion here does that perfectly. And the fact that they're mixing certain elements, like mixing this colorful checkered pattern with flower patterned pants, they're adding hats on top of a full suited look. It creates that contrast of concepts. And all of that mixed with the makeup that we're seeing, I think it just creates a very perfectly put together look that comes off as contemporary, rebellious, whimsical, and all of those things mixed together. So fashion and styling gets an 8.5. The typography is very minimal here. And overall, I'm really okay with that because it seems like in this album, they're committing to having the photography and illustration drive the entire album aesthetic. And to fit into that concept, I love how they're doing this SHINee in the red circle here. It's so delicately placed on the top corner of the album. So considering that there's not a lot of typography, it doesn't really stand out. I think that's okay. It takes a backseat. It does what it needs to do. So typography gets a 5.5 for me. In this album, the artwork, the collages, doodles, they are taking a front and center seat for me. And seeing something like this, where we're seeing the CD print match the background that the CD is on top of, details like that just, they scratch the right part of my brain. And even though we're seeing still the sketch art style, it does not feel repetitive of previous albums. We're also seeing still a collage element, even though the overpowering thing in this image right here is the illustration, but you can see the members' faces still overlaid on top of it. Illustration and graphic elements gets a perfect score as well here. For packaging, we're going back to the standard kind of square CD case that we were seeing in the earlier albums. So it's very standard. It does what it needs to do. It seems like the booklet is glued on top. I really like that the CD is on top of this, I think, foam piece that you can take it out of. The detail of the CD matching the illustration behind it, I think, is a really nice touch to the packaging. It gets a 5.5 for me. And I know it's very debatable on who SHINee is. What is their aesthetic? What is their concept? Because SHINee is a contemporary band, and so they're going to experiment with what's trendy. They're going to experiment with new styles and concepts. That's the nature of the band, and that's the concept of the band itself. For me, what feels so SHINee isn't just the concept of whimsy and imagination. To me, it's the tone that it's being delivered in. It feels like most of these images and the concept of the album is so experimental in its tone, whether that's the camera angles that we looked at, the fashion, the alternating between black and white photography and colored photography, the set that they're filming in, the illustrations, the collages, all of these elements together is what makes me feel like this is what SHINee is about. It's about mixing all of these different inspirations and creating something new that's so visually interesting. And so there's just this overall feeling that this concept and this album is so sure of itself. They're committing to the concept fully. I don't feel like anything is standing out as not within the concept. So all of those things make the concept and tone for me a perfect score. My bias for this album is Key. He just looks so... Just looking at the front cover here, this already has a darker feel to it compared to the other one we were just looking at. I really like that they did almost kind of like a day and night version in a way. You can't see any faces. It's very clear from the front cover. Their faces are blacked out. So it drives more of that concept of like day and night. I found this online. I'm not sure how accurate this is. If that's the case, I think it's really nice that they use different body parts from all the members. And see, now I'm liking the black and white photography concept even more because it plays into the concept of the albums. If this is the night version, it makes sense why we'd have more black and white photography in this one. This is the type of stuff I like seeing. And if I wanted to think about the title a little bit more and tie it into self-perspective or introspection, this type of photography to me speaks to that a little bit more. It's like the image of the person isn't fully solidified, and so I love seeing that being represented in at least some of the pictures that we're seeing in this album. In a lot of these images now, we've moved on to a set that feels a little bit more adult. It feels like the members are hanging out in a lounge or maybe like the green room waiting for their concert to start. It's very much done in like the music scene style of photography that you see very often, where you have certain shots of some of the members, but there's still some type of like movement to them. The edges of the members are a little bit blurry. It creates this very kind of like hazy look to the picture. And I know I keep mentioning this idea of having some type of haziness to make a picture feel like it could be a memory in someone's head. But I really think that that motif is used often in photography to create a sentimental tie with like the audience and the picture that they're looking at. And I love that this is being done again here. We're experimenting with movement, and actually this reminds me of the Good Evening music video, but this is a very interesting black and white image in my opinion. What we looked at before, the whimsical elements we were seeing were full of color, and here it feels like what happens after you come down from this high of imagination. Because they're in this environment that looks like almost like a black void, it contrasts that type of whimsical that we saw before. Who is this? Key? Is this Key? I think this might be Key. Oh, and I'm seeing another face here that I didn't see before. This might be Taemin. Wow, we're seeing them collaged next to each other. And if they are mixing most of the members here in this very like soft, colorful, and double exposure way, it just looks so good. A lot of the photography here looks like a stylistic take on backstage photos that still has a lot of character, plays with light, plays with composition, poses. So photography gets another 10 from me. So it seems like we are seeing different fashion in this booklet. There is cohesiveness from the previous album that we looked at. We still have the very loud patterns in the suit jackets. So there's still this kind of whimsical element that we talked about. But I would say that there's a higher level of sophistication here just because most of these outfits are being looked at in black and white photography. And so you can really focus on the patterns themselves and not the colors that are coming out of the clothes. I also think the fact that they chose outfits that would still look good in black and white, especially this suit of Minho that seems to be shimmery and like makes this image look so interesting. Even these shoes here that are reflecting light, well, all of these small details are being thought of, I think, in terms of the photography and the set. So I think fashion and styling still gets the same score that the other one got, which is 8.5. Again, barely any typography in this one. I'm assuming it's going to be the same as the one before. And we have The Misconception of Me, the title of their album. The me is doubled here. Because this idea of the self not being kind of fully formed, I like that they're showing that with the typography. And the type here is not being separated from the photography. So I think I actually prefer this version of the album in terms of typography more than the other one. We talked about how the collages before were a lot more like visually busy. They had a lot more of the like scribbles and colors working with each other. But here we have collages that are a lot more cleaner cut. This collage, which I'm a huge fan of, just the composition of this artwork, the angles that are being created by the environment that they chose, the movement of the members falling. Packaging seems to be the same thing as before, but overall I think the other album did a much better job in terms of how the CD looked like on top of the background. So the packaging here just gets a 5. So the concept and tone for me here also gets a perfect score, and that's because I'm looking at this album in relation to the album that we looked at before. Because they're both contrasting each other, we have a day album and a night version album visually. Here we're getting a little bit more sleekness and kind of this like loungy vibe or this like backstage artist image. All of these things make this album very strong. In this album, my bias is Junghyun. Do I really need to say anything? Do I really need to explain why? So I want to quickly sift through the repackaged album. I like that we have just like a full page of scribbles, actually. This is the definition of committing, and I love that. It seems like this booklet is showing just actual real performances and pictures of them, which I think is a nice touch because this repackage isn't really trying to create something new. They already released 2 albums that now they're just kind of connecting them together, making more money. It's actually nice to see these actual backstage images of SHINee. I'm led to believe that these are actually the members' scribbles. So this This maybe seems to be Minho's, and it seems to be someone looking into a mirror. And then Onyu drew a cart with sunflower eyes and a vase that has french fries. That's what I want to see it as. I really like this group picture of them. This is something that I was hoping to see with previous albums when I talked about how even if you don't want the members to interact on a cover image, you can still have them do something interesting other than just look at the lens of the camera. And I think this picture accomplishes that perfectly. The members are looking at different directions. They are posed and standing in different ways. I also like that we're not seeing their faces. This to me is a flex because it's saying this is a very well-established band. You know who SHINee is, and so now we have them on the cover wearing sunglasses. We're also seeing this idea again of mixing all of the members' faces together into one, and this is being done actually incredibly well. Even though there aren't a lot of different photography styles being done compared to the previous albums that we looked at, the photography here still has something really appealing to it. There's this feeling of very like sharp, crisp contrast that I'm seeing. Using the right amount of lighting, using shadows as part of the image itself. Even though the camera is like super up close to them, there's still this feeling of mystery and intrigue to the members. And then we have some of these images where we're mixing a little bit of artwork with the image itself. It's creating a very interesting shape to the image and composition. We're also seeing this kind of collage-y element, but still done in a very sophisticated way. There's some type of like sand or like an image of the ground, and it's being overlaid on top of the hat, and it just looks so clean that I almost didn't notice it. The concept is very like dramatic. It feels very avant-garde, so the photography does an amazing job with that. One of my favorite thing about the fashion here is the waist is defined in a lot of these jackets, creating this very sleek and angled look. It creates a more interesting silhouette that I don't think we've seen from them until now. And then when I take a closer look at the details in the jackets, how a lot of them have so many pockets or buttons, and even Key's jacket that has these patterns embroidered on top of it, it kicks the fashion up a notch for me. And what's great about these jackets is that when you take close-up pictures of the members, the details in the jackets still stand out. And I know it's easy to think that this album's fashion theme is jackets, and maybe that's part of it. But I think the theme of this album, fashion-wise, is hats. Almost every picture of the members is with hats on. And then we're getting these outfits with like these bigger hats that to me remind me of the hats I've seen in historical K-dramas. But what's especially incredible about these hats to work with in terms of photography is almost like framing the pictures in some ways and creating directionality or like framing the members' faces. And I really wish we can bring back this style of makeup for SHINee because they look incredible in it. The eyeliner and the fact that they're doing the eyeliner eyeshadow slightly different for each member to match their features, it just looks so cool. But I'm also a huge fan of the bronzer slash like blush that we're seeing defining their faces even more. And I don't think I can imagine these outfits without this type of makeup because it takes away from the concept. Because the fashion and styling here makes such a dramatic statement, it's still doing something so bold. And to me, like I would have never thought that the outfits that we saw with the big like rounded hats would work with the kind of like pilot style outfits. The way that they did the styling, the photography, and everything in this EP blends those two fashion concepts so well together. The makeup and the accessories are the best I've seen so far in terms of just like picking a concept and fully committing to it. But the fashion decisions in this EP are literally front and center. So the fashion styling here gets a 10. Okay, this spread makes me like the typography even more. They're using a very like Swiss slash minimalistic style, but I think it's done so well and fits the photography that we're seeing. I'm also now just noticing the use of this rectangle in multiple ways. We see it on the CD. We see it being used to actually house the lyrics here. We see it in this little component here, and it's all over the back cover. Very well done in terms of reusing a very simple shape but creating something interesting out of it in different spreads and in different ways. So typography gets a 9.5 for me. It's perfectly executed in my opinion. The 0.5 is merely subjective because I'm not a huge fan of minimalism, but I still love the typography in this album. Packaging seems very standard. The only difference here is that it seems like we have a sleeve for the CD case. So that is something that is a little bit more interesting than having just a regular hard case cover. We actually have a decent place to house the CD. So I guess these elements bump it up from a 5 to a 6 for me. Concept and tone for me gets a perfect score here. It's bold, it's sharp, it's a new look for SHINee, and it's very committed to itself. And because there isn't any type of hesitancy I see in the tone of the album, like it's very serious and in your face, and that's what it delivered. My bias for this album is Taemin, but Taemin here is starting to do this pose that I love where he has his hand kind of covering half of his face. He also just looks so moody in these pictures, and the makeup looks incredible on him. Okay. I think one mistake I made earlier in this video is saying that I don't want to really look at different versions of albums because I ended up just doing that anyways. So I think I'm definitely going to judge them together but still look at them all as kind of like one thing. I've mentioned for previous albums and EPs that we looked at that it's really nice and like almost a flex when you don't have to show the members' faces fully. Even though we're seeing 3 of the members in this album cover, it's still more about the photography and the typography. And so I feel like it gives designers a lot more to play with when they're not forced to just use kind of standard photography of the members. Now, looking at more of the photography and the pictures that we're seeing inside the booklets, which seem to be taken mainly from the View music video, it's very clear that the concept of this version of the album is to show a more casual SHINee. And I think the difference that we're getting with this album that we haven't seen with other albums is that this really looks like a film set for me. They're shooting outdoors, so it's amazing to see that they were given that budget to do that. It is a really nice change of pace to see the SHINee members interact with people outside their group. And I love seeing this kind of genuine interactions that we're seeing come out of these pictures. And even the pictures are not being framed in this like perfectly symmetrical way. They look like street photography. They're done in a very casual and laid back way. I also love that we're seeing SHINee in natural lighting now. In all of the other albums, we didn't really get to do that except for 1 or 2 pictures. But here it's almost all of the pictures. They look incredible. Then when we get to these images, which are one of my favorites so far, and that's because there's a clear feeling that you get from them. You can almost feel the water around you. So when an album dedicates certain spreads or images that are not member-centric but more about creating a feeling, we're moving away from having like dry marketing drive every decision, and we're getting more into artistic expression and creating emotion through visuals. So we talked about kind of the story that's being formed here. We're seeing the members interacting with these girls. They're having fun, they're laughing, they have a bonfire going, they're in this like nature-based place, but they also are traveling back and forth. But SHINee being SHINee, they need to have a contrast. And that is some type of darkness to the theme. Something that makes the tone of the album just a little bit off-putting. Everything looks amazing, right? They're having fun, they're diving into the pool, they're laughing. Then you see this one picture. It almost looks like a shed or garage. It looks very dark. Then you have posters of the members all over the walls. These are posters from all of their previous albums. And because I know what happens in like the music video View, where basically the girls chloroform the guys and they kidnap them and take them somewhere, I wonder if this is supposed to be kind of like the girls' room and that it's showing a little bit of that obsession. There's kind of this double-edged sword when it comes to fame, where you can see the brighter side of your fans and have fun with them and interact with them like normal human beings, where you're laughing and exchanging stories. But there's also kind of like the other side of it where there is this level of obsession and kind of like wanting the members to fit a very specific image that we have of them. And so I wonder if this kind of contrast is being told here, but I think it's totally up to interpretation. One thing I'm not, I guess, a huge fan of is the way that they're displaying the pictures inside of a frame. I kind of get how maybe they want it to look like these are storyboards or clips taken out of a film or a video, which would make sense. I just wish there was more of this type of spread where we're getting like a full bleed image. And I think that's just because for some of these spreads where you're seeing kind of the image framed in the same way, it just gets a little monotonous. Okay, so now looking at the photography of the version B album, and I think we're seeing the photography style carry the theme that I just mentioned earlier, where everything is colorful and fun and bright, but there's something a little bit off-putting about it. I'm seeing interesting color grading that I haven't seen seen in previous albums. It creates to me a very unique visual style that's being communicated not just through the poses, the members themselves, the makeup, etc. It's being shown through the colors as well and the way that they treated the colors after they took the pictures. This image is incredible to me. We're still seeing water incorporated in these pictures, even though we're not seeing the pool directly in this image, because the reflection we're seeing here, almost like a water texture overlaid on top of it. Here, we really see a more direct way of seeing this kind of odd element. I mean, even with Junghyun's close-up of him wearing different colored lenses, showing a more like odd eye, which is a nod to one of their songs, I think is creative to include. And if the theme is supposed to be off-putting in certain ways, I think the posing here is highlighting that so well. Even an image like this where the pose looks uncomfortable, but again, it communicates the concept so well. Photography gets a 10. Fashion and styling in the images that we're seeing in version A, very clearly American inspired. It looks kind of like the styles that we saw, I think, in the 90s. Especially when I look at Key's outfit in this picture. I can almost imagine them going into a thrift shop and being able to kind of pick up all of these items. It's also a nice break from like very high concept to see something more casual from the members. What I love seeing about the version B styling is that I think the concept here is communicated so well through the hair colors, the makeup, the color grading, the accessories, as well as the clothes in some instances, but I think all of the other things stand out a lot more for me. We looked at Key's styling here, where he's wearing braces. He has like really bright blue eye contact on. His hair strands have a lot of different colors. I mean, he's giving very like Joker-esque kind of feeling here. In a way, a lot of what the fashion is doing here is showcasing multiple different versions of clowns, in my opinion. Hot clowns. Fashion and styling gets a 9. I think version A does enough to fit the concept, but it's not anything that stands out for me as doing something like very conceptually different or out there compared to other albums. But then version B makes up for that gap that I felt. Typography, in my opinion, plays a huge role in this album. The fact that they have odd warped in this way that makes it feel like it's underwater is in direct ties to the concept and the photography. I think so far just the title of the album does an incredible job at standing out and just looking so modern and timeless. Even looking at the spine of the album, they have SHINee written in Korean and it's also warped. I'm loving this lyric booklet. It's full of color. The titles are warped still, okay, carrying it through. I love seeing consistency in this way. I just love how bright these colors are and that they're being utilized in the lyrics, which we don't see often. I forgot to look at the version A booklet. Honestly, I much prefer the version B booklet just because this one doesn't have a lot of variation that like the other one does, and it's just kind of like red type on a white background. So the typography for me gets an 8.5. The packaging of this album is really interesting because we have the sleeve. I think whenever there's an addition of a sleeve, it adds a little bit more. There are more places where you could have a cover and then a cover within a cover. So it just gives you a lot of opportunities to introduce the album. There's a hole where one of the clown eyes are. That's another interesting aspect. We're getting a jewel CD case separate from the photo album. So all of these things together I think contribute to the packaging and elevate it a little bit from being just kind of standard. I'm giving packaging a 7.5. This is another perfect score for me for concept and tone. If I wanted to look at both versions of the album as completing one story, version A gave us a narrative. It gave us a more casual and like almost movie-like setting for us to look at the members through. But then in version B, that's where we got a lot more experimentation and that kind of odd feeling that we kept talking about. And if a lot of these elements weren't done in the right way, I could see the disconnect that might have formed between both versions of the album. The decisions feel thoughtful, it's relatable, it evokes a certain feeling in me, and this is an album that I love listening to in the summer, and that's because of the very strong visuals associated with it. I think the buys per album tally is going to be very easy to tell from people watching because I've picked Key I think a lot of times because he's so good at blending into a concept and giving it his all. He just has a lot of spunk and energy that comes through photographs for me. It's gonna be Key for me in this album. I'm into music. Now for the album repackage, which as I know is a Halloween-inspired album. I think the photo concept in general still follows some of what we were seeing in Odd. Almost all the pictures have like one element of interest that make the picture feel a little bit odd or off-putting. So it's very similar to the older album, but I think they kick it up a notch here and they make it just like officially fully Halloween-inspired. We're also seeing a lot of stills from the music video, but I think what I love the addition of is these like fake food props that we're seeing, and they kind of look spoiled to me, and so I feel like that even gives it a cooler Halloween element. I also love this display of images where you're overlaying one image on top of another one, even if they don't feel like they're stylistically matching, but they contrast each other really well and make an interesting photo. I love that they're still carrying the photography styles that they also did in previous albums, where we had the blurry images that kind of showcase movement but also create this kind of feeling that you get when you look at the picture. I also love these shots of Taemin where they're utilizing the set and photographing him through a mirror. And now we have a new mask that entered the chat. We have like the Saw mask. A lot of these pictures just feel like a fun Halloween night out for the members where they're dressing up, taking pictures with weird props and different outfits. In terms of communicating energy, spirit, fun, as well as experimenting with angles and light, I think the photography does a really good job. It gets a 10 for me. I love the fashion in the Mayor to the Music video, and we're seeing it here in these pictures as well. I think what's hilarious about this kind of like outfit change from Odd and their hair and expressions, I can imagine this album being like the zombie version of the Odd album, because they're still wearing some elements that look kind of like very American inspired with like the jersey and stuff, but it's all mixed with other things, and now it's looking a little bit more costumey. I also love the hairstyling in this album. I love Kia's frizzy hair here. I love the eyeliner that they're doing. There are other cool pieces that it's taken me a minute to notice, like this jacket that Taemin is wearing that has the cards on it, and Minho's suit jacket here that has like a big flower on it. It just amplifies the costumey feeling of all of it. So similar to the Odd album, fashion and styling gets a 9 for me here because it hits the mark and it still ties to the Odd album, but it kicks it up a notch, similarly to the photography. I'm a huge fan of the typography in this one. I mean, it's so straightforwardly Halloween, yes, I get that. So it's very on the nose, but I think that's what the entire album is like. It's very classically Halloween, but I love when a piece of art is aware of itself. Like this album knows that it's a Halloween album, and so it's gonna do that. I think there's still interesting decisions being made to the font. The lettering looks doubled in a way, which adds a cool element to it. The eye is even incorporated into the two. Okay, I see. There's a plastic case that has Mayor to the Music printed on top of it, and I think that was adding a little bit more to that 3D element or the doubling that I was seeing from the letters. This lyric booklet looks incredible to me because I think the type is being utilized very well here. We're seeing the same theme kind of carried out with the letters kind of dripping paint. I really like the type. I think it's fun. It matches the concept, so it's getting a 9 for me. In terms of packaging, we're getting the same thing as the Odd album. We have a sleeve, and then when you pull it out, there's a photo book and a jewel case. So I think it's going to get the same score. I'm giving the concept and tone a perfect score. For a repackaged album, it builds on the Odd concept so well. It commits more to the horror-esque like feeling of the Odd album. I also love that they committed to the weirdness of everything and they just pushed it further. My bias for this album is Jonghyun. I love his white bleached hair. I love the way it's being styled with it like being tied this way up top. Jonghyun. I love the posing that the members are doing. I think it's very dynamic, and I can already see from the fashion and just the way that they're standing and everything that this is supposed to be a nod to a certain era in time, late 80s maybe, or like 80s and 90s. What I also love about this photo cover for SHINee is that we are seeing a lot of color, and we're seeing that in their clothes, in the background and everything. I can't really say that I'm getting a strong kind of like visual story. What feels like the focus here is, when it comes to photography, is really showing how handsome the members are, and even the way that they're shooting these pictures, the angles, the lighting. It feels like they're trying to show SHINee in a very specific light. They've been around for a while now, they've been together for a while, and they have a lot of experience that they've gained over the years. And they're being photographed like celebrities in this photography style. I feel like you can see their kind of modeling experience coming through these pictures. We have some photos that are contrasting the more serious posing that we're seeing. The pictures themselves even look like they could be a cast from a sitcom from that time. I see that in this picture here too. If you told me that this is a promo picture for a sitcom show based in the 90s or something, I would believe you. Another thing that I think the photography was accounting for is the graphics that we're seeing added into the album and the photo book. So I think that photography is trying to complement the application of these shapes that we're seeing. So having a more simple, less artistic photography style allows designers designers later on, I think, to be able to remove some of the members, right, and overlay them in this way. I think the photography does what it needs to do for the concept. It showcases the members in a really, really flattering way. But in terms of experimentation and compared to what we've seen from previous albums, I wouldn't say photography is the strongest here. And for that reason, I would give it 7.5. For fashion and styling, there's a reason why this album is a huge winner amongst fans in terms of the styling. The members just look so good. They chose just the right haircuts. The cuts on the suits are very flattering and tailored to the members. I really like when SHINee wears suits that are cinched at the waist a little bit because it creates a more interesting silhouette. I also love the color combinations that we're seeing. We have this like navy blue mixed with this deep red. This mustard suit I think is super flattering on Taemin, and not a lot of people I think can pull off this color. Whoever's idea was to put them in turtlenecks, thank you. It highlights the accessories that they're wearing a lot more. Another thing that I'm a huge fan of in terms of styling is that the colors that the members are wearing are cohesive with the other elements that we're seeing in the album. It's pretty obvious so far that one of the main colors in this album are red, and we see that in the clothing, we see that in a lot of these spreads where the background is red and some of these shapes. There's also a yellow being used as kind of like a highlight color, and Taemin is in a yellow suit. We're also getting some outfit changes, which I love seeing. I'm a huge fan of Key's outfit here, where there's a lot of layering happening. I really like this detail in Onyu's shirt. The shape that we're seeing here is being used in the graphics again on the album. I'm also in love with Minho's jacket here. Yes, it's a bold color, but I think what makes it sophisticated and less loud is the black accents that we're seeing on the jacket. Let me find you, where are you? What I also really love about the fashion in this album is that, yes, they do the more sophisticated look with the suits and the patterns and the other pictures that we looked at, but they're also not afraid to put all of the members in really busy patterns and push it a little bit more so it looks like this kind of hyper version of what 90s clothes could look like. And that's what I love about K-pop personally. I think K-pop does a great job of taking inspiration from some eras, but pushing it as far as they can to make something that's a lot louder and has a little bit more of a punch. So I feel like these outfits do that. For all the reasons that I mentioned, fashion and styling gets a 10. It's a perfect score. I'm already a huge fan of the typography that we're seeing so far on this album. And I also love that now we're doing something a little bit different with the SHINee logo. We have the 5 SHINee. It's a thicker font. There's a stroke on the font, and they're using 2 colors that when put together, I think feel very retro. The one of one like logo I was looking at and the member names are printed on the clear case, so when you take it out, it doesn't just look like a clear case, which we've seen in previous albums, and I love that. I love that we can see it a lot bigger here, one of one, SHINee. And this makes me also appreciate the way that they're stacking it even more. The fact that SHINee is coming in and out of the letters of one of one. Oh my god, it even looks so good as just an outline in black on top of the red. This is what I've been waiting for. These are all the track names that we're seeing, and I like that we're carrying out the colors that we saw on the front cover. We're not opening a book and it's just a white background immediately. This looks incredible. It feels like now we're actually thinking about the lyrics. They are not separate from the rest of the images, they are part of the booklet. The type is really fun, it's big, it's just very playful. I love that the layout is also changing between the spreads. I'm just a huge fan of the type in this album. There's no doubt about it, typography gets a 10 from me. The way that it's laid out, the way it's interacting with everything else, it's just chef's kiss. We already saw a lot of the graphic elements so far in some of these spreads that we've been looking at. We're seeing shapes used in the back to create a texture. That was also reflected in some of the fashion choices. Another amazing detail. We're seeing the same shape carried out throughout the booklet. It looks like a sparkle, and obviously knowing SHINee being SHINee. Especially looking at a picture like this where it feels like a lot of the graphic shapes are Memphis inspired. I like that that's being carried out in the photography as well. Illustration and graphic elements get a 10 for me. We've been looking a little bit at this packaging that so far we've seen is a jewel case and a photo book, and they're inside a clear case. And even though I mentioned before that I'm not a huge fan of jewel cases, it works perfectly in the setting. It is a nod back to an era where CDs were primarily sold in a jewel case like this. So I think this is actually the perfect application of it. But I also know that the album came out in different versions, so they also made a cassette tape. And that by itself I think is very cool. I also love the way that they adapted the design shines for this smaller size. It still has all the fun elements that we saw in the other packaging, and it still looks beautifully laid out in this one as well. This is the highest packaging score I've given a SHINee album, with a 9.5. Concept and Tone also gets a perfect score for this album, even though the photography is lacking in certain ways, because everything else makes up for it so much. Like the fashion, the typography, the graphic elements, the packaging, everything is working really well together to create a super memorable concept for SHINee, one that highlights their good looks, their charms, shows them in a more mature light, and all of these things are being done in a way that still feels timeless, where a lot of these visuals feel like they are relevant even today. Picking a bias for this album is super hard to do because they all look incredible. Their outfits look amazing. Their haircuts are incredible. Honestly, I know this is a cop-out, but what if we have just one album that has an OT5 bias? Can I do that? I just realized that I make the rules here, so I can do that, and I'm gonna do that. Now let's jump into the album repackaged for One of One, which is One and One. I do really like the title of the repackage. I think it's a nice play on One of One. But let's look at the front cover of this. So what we're seeing on the front is just the print on the CD. I think it's nice because they tried their best to showcase all of the 5 members and not have them interfere with the One and One title of the album. So I think that it probably took a little bit of maneuvering to get them in the same shot in this way. And I see here in the photography that we are trying something a little bit different, where the photography before was very playful and fun and showing the members in this very like successful and like celebrity-like look. I'm seeing here just from far away that the photography is exploring a little bit more here with light, with backgrounds, with environments. And I always love seeing that. So I think it's nice to have that contrasted with the other photos that we saw. I love when real objects that we can interact with are being used as a light source. Maybe not the primary light source, but still adding something to the picture. Especially that it looks like they're filming at night. So when your background is really dark, it's nice to add some type of element to create like some interest to the image. I gave the photography in the previous album 7.5, so I think I'm gonna give this one 8. We're seeing a little bit more muted colors. And even just looking at the fashion from far away, there is color in the fashion. It's not like they're always wearing neutral colors here. There's some reds, we're seeing denim, and we're seeing other textures in their clothes. And this kind of aesthetic looks a little bit like the Midwest for me, but I was trying to Google like what other terms can be used for this, and I saw like soft grunge, which I think kind of fits in there. But then I saw the word normcore, which made me laugh because I guess if you wanted to compare these outfits to the other ones, it's like, okay, we have SHINee, the band, and the 5 of them are performing on stage or they're filming a music video, and so it makes sense to put them in these very colorful suits. But then what do they wear after they're done with all of that, where they're just relaxing and chilling? Well, they're gonna wear plaid shirts and striped clothes and stuff like that, so normcore. Fashion and styling gets a 6 for me here because it is doing what it needs to do, but it gets a point above 5 because it is contrasting the One of One album well. I like that in the typography we're still seeing like a little bit of a skewed perspective, and we have the type interacting with some of these shapes. I didn't notice that SHINee is written inside of these black circles. In the previous album, the 5 was used instead of the S. We're seeing here 1 being used instead of the I in SHINee. So that's a really nice detail. So overall, as a cover, I think this is very cleverly done. Is it as striking to me as the other album? Probably not. I do like that at least they're playing around with shapes here, and I like how they're playing around with the layout of these spreads. So typography is a 7.5 for me. I do think it's interesting that we have like both CDs attached to each other, but you open them on different sides. I think that's actually pretty clever. Because of that creative element that we're seeing with the packaging, I'm giving it a 7.5. I think concept and tone here is a little bit weaker than what we've seen with previous albums, so I'm giving it a 6.5. Even though there are some standout elements like the experimentation with the lighting of the photography, them being in an actual outdoor set, but overall conceptually this album repackaged does not stand out for me, and having the concept just being a casual version of what we saw before just feels very underwhelming to me. So here I think I'm gonna go with... God, it's so hard because they're all posing so well, but I'm going with Jonghyun for this one. I love this album. It's actually the album that I discovered SHINee with. When I went into their like discography to pick an album, I picked this one because of the visuals, like the front cover of it. So it had a very, very strong impression on me. I also think that this album is very important in SHINee's career because it is the album that they released after Jonghyun's passing. And they used the album to explore a lot of the themes of grief and moving on, but also representing their feelings not in the way that everyone else expects them to. And I know that this album was released in different chapters. It was like episode 1, 2, 3. But I'm gonna look at everything at once. I really like these two pictures. I think they're beautiful. They are telling a visual story. It's very clear that they're leaving a space for Jonghyun in this picture. I also like that it's a further away angle from them, and it shows them like very small within this kind of like vast environment that they're in. But I think this shot does two things for me. It reminds me of this like message that they had in the Good Evening music video, is how people are perceiving them after this event happened and how there's this lens basically on them. And so showing them from this like high up angle could be a nod to that, of them being observed while they're trying to move on and process what happened. They're showing you visually that there's a spectrum of light. This material that is on top of Taemin showcases that well. It shows also a lot of nuance with the story that they're trying to tell through the visuals. Whatever emotion is being explored here is nuanced. It's not going to look like what people are used to it looking like. The idea of having a bunch of screens around the members where they're on this like circle platform and they're spinning, this also could be a nod to being observed and feeling observed by the public. These images that personally for me make me feel more emotional. I think a lot of the times when grief or depression is talked about, there's often comparisons to kind of like feeling of sinking or being engulfed by something. And so representing that by kind of like falling into water, I think shows that emotion very well. Some of these other pictures are the ones that really get to me, and it's because the members are purposely photographed in this really big environment. Like looking at Minho in this picture, he's standing on like a barren land. It just feels very empty. And even though we know that Minho is tall, he still looks very small and isolated. And that's another way I think to portray that feeling of grief and processing something traumatic like that. I see that picture too with Ki here. I mean, even the clothes that he's wearing, where he's kind of engulfed by his shirt, he looks even smaller here. And I think the fact that he's leaning in this way makes him look a little bit more vulnerable, at least to me. I usually associate flares with some type of signal, right? Like you're signaling something to something far away. And so I wonder if there is thought and meaning behind using a prop like that on set. I also really like that we're getting some playfulness here in terms of the color. And I think that's good because it represents some of the other songs on the album that are a lot more playful. We're mixing some of the photography with the graphic elements, and I think it's done very, very well. In the second chapter, we're getting more directly looking into the lens of the camera. Like this image here, contrasting the two images that we saw earlier, I think shows that progression well. Another thing I noticed in terms of the objects they're interacting with, this plastic material, and now we're seeing like the members stand in front of that material. So I think that's another visual progression in terms of like maybe showcasing the steps in their grieving process. Moving on to the third chapter of the album, I'm really liking that we're getting new clothes and a little bit of a change of atmosphere. Now we're seeing them more in an indoor studio, and the photography here feels like it's playing very clearly with light, sometimes in softer ways, other times in more dramatic ways. I think this light beam kind of going through them is a nice detail. I really like this shot of Minho and Onyu. I think there's a lot of emotion in it, and honestly I'm trying not to be like really sad talking about this, but it's a little bit hard for a picture like this because knowing a little bit more about the members and the process that they went through, I think the way that they're posed and the way that they're leaning on each other, and I think especially when a group of people go through something hard together, after that they start finding comfort in each other, and that's kind of the picture that I get. Photography gets a 10. It's very thoughtful, very contextual, but still manages to be colorful, and it still has a lot of dynamic shots that have movement. There's also a variety in the tone of the images. There are pictures that are portraying feelings of sadness and loneliness, other pictures of support and unity. There's pictures that are symbolizing more of the process of moving on, the feeling of hiding behind a transparent veil. So in terms of symbolism, in terms of a visual story being told, I think this album actually does the best in terms of photography when it comes to that. I also think the fashion here is just a lot more modern. It's obviously closer to the year that we're in right now, so a lot of the fashion choices I think are going to translate a little bit better. And I like that the fashion and the photography go hand in hand, and choosing which outfit outfit to match with which specific prop in the picture. Because I'm seeing a lot of this kind of like monochromatic look in some of the pictures. I also love some of these outfit decisions that are made for the nighttime pictures that they took. I think they do a good job of standing out from the dark background. The fashion and styling gets a 9 for me here. It's very unique, very memorable. They're very stylish and modern, so I'm naturally going to gravitate towards them more. I like the thoughtfulness that's being put between mixing the outfits with the photography and the sets and the props that are being used. I think not including type on the cover of this album actually works really well because the album is very graphic and they're using primary colors, so it's very in your face. I think it's something that you can easily pick out from the rest of the albums on like a shelf. Just like we saw in the One-on-One album where SHINee was written into like circles, we're seeing the same thing here. There's a really nice contrast. They're still using the primary colors yellow, red, and blue, but I love how they're alternating between how much each part of the packaging uses like which color primarily. I love the font that they're using for the titles of the tracks. I also love that they're doing something experimental and inventive with it. We're seeing other shapes being used in replacement of certain letters. And this is another example where I love the lyric spread so much because they're being utilized to their full potential. They're not separated from the aesthetic of the rest of the album. They're actually defining the visual concept of the album in a way. Now we've moved on to the second episode. And so having the two on the back, but the way it's being stretched out makes it feel like it could be just a shape on its own, is incredibly clever. I think the shapes on the CD are actually reflecting the shapes on the main cover. The first chapter, the main shape that's featured on the cover is a triangle, and that's what we see in the CD reflected through the like circles. They're forming a triangle. Then the second album has a circle primarily featured on it, and we see that being formed through the shapes that we're seeing on the album. And then the third album features a square, and then that square is being represented through the shapes on the CD. I think I could rave about the typography in this album for hours, and that makes it obvious that it gets a perfect score from me. We've already talked a lot about the graphics indirectly while looking at other things, but I wanted to look at the album covers since they are primarily driven by shapes and illustrations. For an album series that is using the same colors as well as the same subject matter, which is the fox, each part of this album series manages to create a very unique cover because the amount of each color that is being used for each of the albums is different. And then for the epilogue, we're seeing white introduced to the rest of the colors, which to me feels like in the first 3 albums, let's say that what we're looking at here, it's a set or a world that we've created using these shapes. Then the first 3 albums are more of a close-up on that set. And then the epilogue looks like if you zoomed out from that set a little bit, because this right here feels like a spotlight. And I've heard from fans that the fox is representing Jonghyun. So the fact that we're seeing kind of like the fox retreat from the spotlight could be a symbolism of his passing. So in that kind of way, I find the decisions that were made for this incredibly thoughtful. I think it's very cool that they picked 3 primary colors, blue, yellow, and red, and then also picked 3 primary shapes, circle, square, and triangle. Not only does the spread look incredibly cool, but I think the shapes being used here feel like they can represent many different things. You could look at these shapes as creating little rooms that SHINee is walking in and out of. I could also see like these blue shapes here working as a door to something. You could even look at these shapes as kind of like hills that the members might have to move up and down from. And then what I'm loving about the rest of these, where they're separating the members, but all of the members are still climbing somewhere higher. Minho is sitting on a higher surface. Key looks like he's technically sitting below this kind of surface, but there's an implication that he could climb onto it. Onyu looks like he's in movement. Similar thing with Taemin. It can mean that they are choosing to move forward in their careers. This feeling of like they're still young, they're still in their career, they're still pursuing something bigger than them at that time. So this gets a perfect score for me. It looks like these albums come in this like box that opens up to the side, and then you take out the lyric booklet and the photo booklet, and then all the other inclusions. The CD's housing also looks very good. There's a spot for your thumb to kind of like grab the CD. I'm also a huge fan of this type of packaging because it feels like you're opening up a box of memories. I think just the act of taking out stuff in this way gives me that feeling. So considering all of those things, I think the packaging did a really, really good job. Concept and tone is obviously a 10 because all of the other scores are so high. I like that SHINee is telling their story through multiple chapters. Each each highlighting different nuances to their feelings. On top of that, the visual concept of this album is so incredibly strong that I'm happy it exists in 4 different variations. My bias for this album has to be Keith. He looks incredible in this haircut. He's always an amazing model, but I think this album shows a side of him that I haven't seen before that makes me connect with him a lot. Now moving on to the Don't Call Me album, which seems to have a few different versions. We have 2 photo books and 4 versions of the jeweled CD cases. And I think just looking at the albums sitting next to each other like this, I'm immediately pulled to the fake reality version. That's probably because it has the most color. And the way that they're posed makes it feel like each of the members is living in a specific corner of the set separately from the rest of the members. I think it creates a very interesting photograph compositionally. This is one of the best sets that SHINee has had in terms of intentionality and props. Everything, yes, looks fake, but because that is intentional and it's being reflected in the way they're posed and the props they're interacting with, as well as the fashion that they're wearing, it complements the set with it being kind of like a fake reality. I love that we're using spoiled food props again. It reminds me of the Married to the Music album, and I'm getting this kind of concept from this album, specifically the fake reality version, where we're seeing ordinary elements like a telephone booth and some food and a car, as well as flowers here. These are all ordinary things that people might interact with every day, but because this version, where everything is super brightly colored, is done as this very hyper-realistic and almost surrealist aesthetic, that's what creates the off-putting feeling. It feels like the members are trying to escape this fake reality, but they're kind of stuck in it, and stuck to perform the same list of tasks over and over again in a way. Even though there might be attempts for them to escape this fake reality, I get this feeling of almost like this loop that's happening here. And it might be because of the members' expressions. In some of these pictures, they kind of look defeated. Even the car with the kind of like dummy sitting in the passenger seat feels like a test car. And because of how clean the car is, it just looks fake. It doesn't look like a real car. And I think having the car in this fake reality set, as well as the phone booth, and seeing the members interact with the phone booth, makes it feel like, oh, there might be ways to escape this fake reality, but they're not working. So it's almost like they're taunting the members. Even this picture of Taemin pulling a suitcase that looks to be open plays into that idea of wanting to leave a place, but being kind of stuck or having to repeat your efforts over and over again. So if the suitcase is open and stuff falls out of it, it means that at a certain point Taemin would have to repack his suitcase and close it again. So it plays into this idea of that loop. And these pictures with this kind of like voyeuristic element where Minho is looking at the lens, but it makes it look like he could be looking at someone, and there's like this dummy sitting here, as well as this picture of him looking out through the window, and it feels like this picture might be taken from the car. They might be adding an element where someone is watching them, and this could be representative of a lot of different things, but either ways, a story is being formed through the imagery, and I think that's super cool. I'm in love with this concept of the photo shoot for these outfits. There's still something being done with the photography, and we see that through the lighting. Like the backgrounds here look overexposed, and it creates this huge contrast between something that's very soft and airy, which is what the background looks like, and the outfits that they're wearing, which have a lot of metal in them. We're also seeing the light being used to play with shadows, and again we're doing the style that I'm a huge fan of having a picture overlaid on top of a texture background. I think what's tying these pictures to the ones with like the very high fashion looks is the fierceness that we're seeing from the posing and the way that they're looking into the lens. It's very confrontational, which matches, I think, the title of the album. I feel like the photography really shines more in the like high fashion looks and the fake reality version because it's a lot more pulling visually, and obviously that makes sense, right? Because it's a lot easier to convey a story when you're using props versus using a set as a background. I love the fashion in the fake reality version. We see Minho in this all blue suit and it's matching the background, which adds to the concept of everything feeling very pristine and fake, like very obviously fake. I think they made the right choice giving this specific outfit to Onyu, who has a lot more of a whimsical image than the rest of the members. Talk about Key's outfit. It's color blocked, it's got texture, the sleeves have something interesting going on with them. I also love the small details that they paired with this coat, like this collar right here. Then we have these outfits and the accessories that come with them. It looks very like glam punk, where we're getting super ornate headpieces, but the punk aspect is coming from the fact that they're metal. metal and that they have like chains dangling from the headpiece. I also love this nose accessory that Taemin has on. So that's where I think the styling of the accessories and the pieces working with the photography is just doing such a great job. I do like some of these items that we're seeing for this concept photo shoot, even though like a lot of the textures are interesting, but in terms of matching the energy and the punch that we're getting with the other outfits and concepts, I think this one ends up underwhelming me a little bit. Fashion and styling gets a 9. I like the font that they're using, and I like that the 7 is incorporated here. I do find this line interesting. Any resemblance to actual person or event is purely coincidental. I believe I saw this written on one of the billboards behind Taemin in the fake reality version, so I think it adds to the entire like kookiness of the concept. I actually do like this typography application where we're seeing some of the pictures and the lyrics, but the way they're all displayed kind of makes it look like a newspaper. I love the back cover because this layout felt very familiar, especially seeing the asterisk and the hashtag. And when I looked up a payphone keypad, it's in the exact same orientation that we see on the back cover. Google is saying there are some situations where pressing 0 is necessary or was necessary in the past. Dialing 0 would connect you to a human operator who could assist you. I was talking earlier about how the photography and the set felt like SHINee was stuck in this place. They're trying to leave, but they can't. And so they keep going through the motions of everything. And I feel like the 0 being canceled out in that way could be signifying that. So I'm giving typography a 7. And again, that's mainly driven by the back cover of the fake reality version. So we've kind of looked at the packaging a little bit. We have 4 different versions of the jewel case packaging. And I would say these ones are very straightforward. And then for the photo books packaging, I like the size of the photo books because it allows designers to do a lot more with the spreads. I really like that we have extra inclusions, and it does feel cool to open them from an envelope. Okay, so for concept and tone is a bit tricky for me. If I was still judging the albums just on the version A of them, and let's say Fake Reality was version A, I would give the concept and tone a perfect score. I think the reality version just feels underwhelming. So concept and tone gets a 7 for me. And for this album, my bias is on you. He literally looks like a painting in these pictures. His posing, the hair color, the outfits. Moving on to Atlantis, what I'm loving about this album cover is that they're playing with size and like contrasting sizes. It's also showing movement because all the members are looking in different directions, which gives you the feeling that the world that the picture was taken in is a lot bigger than what we're seeing on the cover. And then to contrast it, I like that the picture for the second version of the album, the members aren't standing next to each other. They're still part of the same world. It feels like they're emphasizing more of the journey and kind of like the map or the way that they can get there. I can already see that they're trying to kind of play off the fake reality version of Don't Call Me album. Things look like props, things feel a little bit off. This kind of feeling of like, yes, they are on a set, but it still feels like a whole world that they're creating with the set, and it's okay if it looks fake. Almost like they're using the rest of their imagination to make the world real, and they kind of step into the like camp territory. In this one, just from the outfits and the way that they're posed and looking at the camera, it has like a very Prince aesthetic. SHINee has been together for a while now, and they're still relevant and popular. They have their own fan base. Having them look and dress like princess of like kind of a faraway land, let's say, fits within that kind of legacy. Even though they've made it this far in their career, they've gained a lot of experience and accolades. It's a nice reminder that despite all of that, they still have the curiosity and sense of adventure and exploration as a band that have just started their career. So photography gets a 9 here. Before fashion, we already talked about this contrast that they're doing, and I think the main signifier that they're showcasing themselves as like a prince versus an explorer is the fashion. This fancier aesthetic we're seeing in details of their clothing, like the collar that he has on his jacket. I love also that the necklace is a shell. I love Taemin's jacket here, and I would say that his outfit looks the most kind of modern. It's very clear that for the casual outfits, they wanted to make them look busy so that they can almost camouflage themselves with the busyness of the rest of the set that they're on. When I look at this Pac-Man lunchbox, it makes me think that they are purposely showing kind of like a throwback to an era that is now considered more retro. It explains some of the fashion choices for me, like denim on denim, a shirt like Taemin's, the lettering that I'm seeing on there, even the art on Onyu's shirt. I love kind of like the psychedelic feeling that it has with the spirals for eyes and the type kind of duplicated in this way. So for fashion and styling, I'm giving it 7.5. For type, I'm already a huge fan of the title of the album and the font that they're using for it. And the lines in the font are very kind of waveform inspired. And I think the thickness of them makes them feel a lot more modern. The letters are debossed and they're holographic. So I think that's a great touch. And then when I look at the title of the album in this type of application, it looks like it fits. It looks like it was painted on with a brush. I love these lyric pages. And that's because they're using elements from the album, but they're playing around with layout, with texture, with overlapping things, and they're very typographically driven. I love the typography, so I'm giving this a 9. Now for the illustrations and graphic elements, I love that the CD is a map with those kind of like landmark dots that they have on it. It makes it feel like a constellation in a way. This compass that they created is super cool. I love that the middle of it is a flower, and I wonder if that has a significance. I'm not really sure what this flower is. Oh, I don't know all the references and things related to SHINee, but if this is a pansy in there, then that's a really cool, I think, detail to add for the fans. Possibly one of my favorite things though about this album is that they have really cool inclusions. I think that boosts up the packaging for me because all of these elements that we're seeing on this envelope are all custom made. Even having the opportunity to draw maps in different like looks and styles is super cool. Here's more of these objects that could be 3D generated or photographs, I'm not sure. Let's try to think about each object. The pillar here could be representing the Prince aesthetic maybe. The fire hydrant. Am I reading too much into this? Are the things on top of the octopus supposed to represent the colored skinny pants that SHINee has worn? Am I crazy? I think maybe I've just been doing this review for way too long. So maybe this is about like digging up memories related to SHINee's career. Whoever made these had way too much fun with them. Illustration and graphic elements gets a 10. I think one of my favorite things here is the binding of the album. It makes it so that you can open this, you can lay it flat and look at it in that way. And I feel like that considers the concept because when you open up a map, that's kind of how you look at it a lot of the times, especially when it's been folded and opened so many times. But then we have the inclusion, which we've talked about a little bit already. They're very cool and fun. This is where for me, like, packaging doesn't all have to look as cool as Key's album. Key's albums are incredible. They have fresh concepts that are fun. But sometimes for me, just having enough thoughtfulness about smaller decisions, like the binding and other things like that, still can make the packaging score for me a lot higher. So packaging gets a 9. The concept in this album, it's kind of like in your face. It's trying to be direct and campy and very like loud. But when I think about it in comparison of the Don't Call Me album, I think the strongest tie here is like to the fake reality version where you also have a set with props. And maybe it's okay. Maybe an album repackaged sometimes is to explore a new concept with the same songs that you have. But it also makes me think like if this was saved for a fully flushed out album, not a repackage, could it have been explored further? So I think this one gets a 7 for me. My bias for this album is Minho. I love him in this hair color. There are so many versions of this album, but I kind of want to look at them all together. In terms of the photo that we're seeing on the front cover, the photo doesn't really pull me in as much. I love the back cover of this photo book. In a way, I actually wish that it was on the front cover because it's showing that kind of like dark, like nighttime aesthetic, and it's a lot more visually interesting to me. We're seeing this kind of ominous room in the background, and the members are kind of stuck in this maze. That like red entryway looks very ominous, but also promising in the sea of like monotony and lack of color. It would be cool if they are showing this kind of like they had diverging paths and now they're trying to find their way back to each other. What I really like is that they're playing a little bit with light and fog to create this mysterious vibe. Considering that there's a huge element of voyeurism and like looking at something in detail or trying to search for something, I really like how the members are kind of confronting the camera in a way. This is where I like some of the choices being made where they're adding this kind of pink color. This is already making the photo book stand out a little bit from the monotony of the blues and the blacks that we're seeing. And as we move through the book, we start to see a little bit more of different colors being introduced. So I wonder if that's them starting to kind of either maybe find each other or they're getting closer to something that's being shown through the lighting and addition of color. That's a really interesting credits page. I really enjoy it. It makes me think if this is the POV of the members, then they did make it out of this maze. So now we have the second photo book. It's very clear that they made it into that room. Visually and compositionally, this already looks a lot more interesting. I love the image on the back here as well. It looks like they're still plotting something or working towards something together now, because before they were separated from each other and then they worked towards getting into this room that has this miniature, almost like control board. Now that they found each other, they're more in control and they can kind of control the narrative and how to move forward. And it seems like they're carrying this idea of having something related to the set in the credits page, so that's kind of cool. Alright, so this is the third photo book. So I guess in terms of the progression, maybe it's like now that they've devised a plan, or if they looked through this miniature and they made some decisions, it's almost like, okay, we're ready. We're a crew and we're ready to accomplish whatever plan that we have going on. The spreads do get better as you go through the photo book. This is so much more interesting to look at because now it looks like there is a concept being put together and not just photographs slapped on top of a page. In terms of the photo books that we looked at, the first two were more successful in the photography because I feel like they created interesting sets for the members to interact with and navigate through. So it helped tell a visual story. And even though the sets were minimalistic at certain points, I feel like they allowed the members to stand out while still providing an interesting background to kind of like build a world for them to exist in. And I feel like that was lacking in the third book, where the photography alone felt empty and it only stood out for the fashion mainly, and it needed a little bit more of those design elements overlaid on top of it to kind of make it a little bit more visually interesting. So the last photo book I feel like lowered the photography score for me a bit, so I'm gonna give it 8.5 for now. Fashion and styling. Minho's outfit, I really like how he has like the stars in the shiny color on the pants. I think this is one of the more interesting outfits that I'm seeing in terms of like exploring something with the texture. I like that his pants feel like kind of frilled. Other things I'm liking in the fashion are Key's hat and jacket. This is an outfit, in my opinion, that makes a statement. The outfit lines are so clean. The silhouette of it looks amazing. In terms of fashion and what we've seen before, I think it's clear for me that I prioritize sometimes exploration and making a statement with a fashion that feels very kind of in tune with the concept or explains the concept in a new layer that's interesting. And I'm not really getting that from these outfits. In terms of styling, I actually love this era because I think freckles look really, really good on him. It gives him such a different look, and I think they were using a lot more blush on his cheeks, so it just defines his face a little bit differently. This is an inventive street look that I like seeing. I love the puffer jacket and then the pants. I'm also loving Onyu's makeup here, the eyeshadow that they have for him. I like that they're doing some type of color cohesion here, where Onyu and Key have more of the pinks in their clothes, and then the green is being carried out through the rest of them. I think the fashion was the most interesting on the third photo book. And then the first two photo books, I felt like the fashion was still a little bit boring, but they looked amazing. Like they looked great in all of the clothing. And that is one plus to fashion, is to just highlight your subject in a really flattering way. And so they did do that. So I'm gonna give fashion and styling a 7. First of all, I really like the hard 8 lettering that we're seeing. With the title of an album like Hard, it makes sense to have the letters be really thick and bold, but I think the additional decisions being made to like have the letters be cut off on the top of the page and have this kind of like chunk taken off of the D so they can fit like the 8 in there. The like logo is raised on top of the page, so it's embossed. I think it's a great thing because it adds a lot more texture to like touching the album and interacting with it. These are all things I think that add to the packaging experience. Just from a glance, it does feel like the paper of this is different from the high gloss paper we're seeing for the images that were printed. But I really like that, adding a distinction like, oh, you're now entering lyric spreads. It adds a little bit more to the packaging, I think. Overall though, I'm loving these lyric spreads. This is something I haven't noticed before looking at this album. I always wondered what these shapes that are creating texture on the album are, and I hadn't noticed that they're actually using the hard letters, creating almost like a graphic element from the typography. So those two elements are working really, really well in this box. I think the typography stands out the most on the covers of the album, where the logo of the album is displayed really nicely. But mostly I think it stands out in the lyric booklets And that's because of how they're typesetting, the like actual lyrics, but also the entire layout of the spreads that we saw. And I've praised that kind of approach in all of the other albums that utilize typography, photography, and graphic elements well in the lyric spreads. So personally, I would consider the typography usage and application here to be stronger than almost all of the other categories in this specific album. And in terms of packaging, I really do like how photo books look like they're high quality, like they're well made. And then they did include like the sleeve for the photo books, which I really liked. And the box looks like it's made of really good, like sturdy material. It felt like there was thoughtfulness put into making small decisions here and there to make the packaging experience a little bit more engaging and dynamic. And I appreciate that. For the concept and tone, what I enjoy the most is the story progression that we saw through the photo books. I really like this idea of them carrying over some elements that we saw in like the Don't Call Me album. Like this idea of SHINee being stuck somewhere and they have to find their way back to somewhere. It's a nice theme to see carried out through their albums visually. I feel like the progression though of the concept was a lot clearer in the first two like photo books. We were getting from point A to point B. We were stuck in this like environment. Then we made it into this room and now we're planning the future, maybe where to go next. But then in the third photo book, I kind of wish that there was a little bit more of a tie showing us how that journey moved through. And maybe I missed something while looking at the third version, but it wasn't coming out as clearly as the first two like photo books. What's striking more about this album, I think, is the tone of like, okay, this is an album called Hard, so everyone's going to be expecting this like very like hard looking image, but instead they showed range. They showed a cleaned up aesthetic, a more casual and then a more streetwear, but even the streetwear made sure to include a lot of color, and I think that flips the kind of like expectation for the tone on its head. My bias for this album is gonna be Taemin because I really like the styling here for him. So it's been quite some time since I last filmed the review. It took a lot of time to film that video, so I needed some time to review the footage and come to some decisions for the best album and the best EP. And after rewatching some of the things that I talked about, I wanted to clarify again that all of these things that I was sharing are coming from mainly my subjective opinion. Some of them are based from my expertise as a designer, but overall, these are all really subjective. So if you find yourself disagreeing or feeling like you needed to add a lot more onto what I already said, then I'd love to hear from you. I think the more opinions that we have on a piece of art, the more substance that it has, because it means that it's open to interpretation and that there's more to it than just the surface level that we see up front. And the categories that we have today are Best Album, Best EP, Honorable Mentions, and the Most Consistent Bias. But let's start with the Best Album nominees. The first nominee is the Misconception of Us album, which included both Dream Girl and Why So Serious albums. This album wasn't just great in providing us very creative and beautiful illustrations and collages. It gave us a concept that explored creativity, imagination, and packaged it in a really fun, colorful, and vibrant way. The second nominee in this list is Odd. This is an album that still remains relevant to this day in terms of the visuals, the themes. What was great about this album is that for the first version, we got to see SHINee in a very casual yet cinematic atmosphere. It also showed a type of youthfulness that either we dream of when we're younger or we look back on and feel nostalgic towards when we're older. It also gave us something that was still experimental and played around with fashion, photography, and that odd feeling that SHINee continued to explore in a lot of their albums. The third nominee in this list is One of One. This is an album that's unforgettable for a lot of us because of the visuals. It's vibrant, it's colorful, it's based on a retro concept, which is still appreciated and loved to this day. But I think what stood out for me the most was the typography in this album, as well as the packaging, and how everything worked together to create something very fun and dynamic. And then we have the last nominee for Best Album, and that's The Story of Light. This is an album that was very meaningful for SHINee and their career, but it also managed to show us that there's complexity to human beings and emotion and exploring something in the public eye. Because this album explored a very complex topic like grief in a very nuanced and colorful way, it showed us the different spectrum that comes with grief, especially when it's giving tribute to someone that was multifaceted and colorful and full of light. And I think that the album visuals, from the very brightly illustrated covers to the photography and the fashion of the members, really executed that very, very well. And the best album goes to Odd. Odd. Very odd.
Very odd.
Moving on to Best EP, with the first nominee being Romeo. Romeo is one of those EPs that showed us you don't need a huge budget to showcase a fun and youthful element, even if you're using just a white backdrop. If you add a little bit of props and you create some kind of story through the posing and the fashion that they're wearing and everything involved in the process of taking really good photos. And it also showcased the members' organic chemistry that was coming through the photography really well. It also had some really great typography moments as well as illustrations, and overall just had a very fun, youthful vibe that was perfect for where SHINee was at in their careers. The second nominee in the list is Sherlock. Sherlock was able to revisit some of the concept that we saw in Romeo, but it was able to do it in a slightly more mature way, asserting that the members have grown up a lot since then, but they're still the same members who have this passion and creativity. And then the last nominee on the list is Everybody. Everybody gave us this avant-garde look of SHINee with a very bold look and fashion that is still memorable to this day. They were able to showcase that they have this edge to them that can look editorial, and everything was packaged and presented in a very sleek and sharp way. And the winner for Best EP goes to Everybody. Now for the honorable mentions, we're gonna start with Replay the EP. And how can we not? This is the EP that really started everything. Then we have Lucifer, the album. Lucifer is one album that I really enjoyed the fashion in. Then we have Married to the Music, which is one of those repackaged albums that I'm so glad exists because it was really fun to just see the members on a night out enjoying themselves, dressing up as different characters. We also have Don't Call Me on the honorable mentions list because of that fake reality version, the visuals, the set, the colors that they gave us, and I think that carries perfectly into the Hard album. It showed that SHINee can still experiment with concepts that newer bands are doing, but it didn't trend chase in any way, and instead chose to showcase who SHINee is and what they've been about. And now for the most consistent bias, it was actually a tie between Junghyun and Key. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. This is my first video, and so I'm still getting used to kind of the technical aspect of everything, editing, lighting, everything that comes with creating a video. So I appreciate your patience for the not very perfect moments that I had. And I would love to make more videos exploring different topics that I find interesting in K-pop, K-dramas, and anything that really piques my interest. But if there is an artist that you'd like to see this kind of video for, where I deep dive into a few of their albums, maybe one album specifically, that you find is very visually interesting, please let me know in the comments and I would love to take a look at them. But that's all I have for today. Thank you so much, and this was Z. Bye!